Hi there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to Reading Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. Today we're starting Book 10, famous Book 10, the ending, the last book of the Ethics. We're looking, in Book 10 composed of basically 9 chapters, and it starts on the question if we ended with friendship, the last chapter we concluded the discussion of friendship. Now he said at the end of that, now we're going to be addressing pleasure, and that's going to be the thing, maybe the question we're going to address. So therefore, let's go to it. Chapter 1, okay? And chapter 1 is not going to be that long, so let's go look at it. Perhaps it follows next, after these matters, to go through what concerns pleasure. For pleasure especially seems to be closely bound up with the genius, of human, the genius, genus, the connected with human being. Hence, people educate their young by steering them by means of pleasures and pains. So, therefore, pleasure is very bounded up with the genus, the thing that is the thing that is the human being. And hence, people educate their young by steering them through means of pleasures and pains. And with a view to the virtue of character, the greatest consideration seems to be delighting in what one ought and hating what one ought. Since these extend throughout life as a whole, having a weight and capacity that bears on virtue as well as a happy life. So, therefore, in other words, he ends his sentence right here with a view to virtue of character, right? Now, the question of the virtue or goodness of character, the correct or good, excellent character, of your character of a person, the ordering of the person's soul in that sense, right? This character, the question of their character. The greatest consideration seems to be delighting in what? Delighting in what one ought, and hating what one ought. So the greatest consideration seems in delighting what one ought and hating what one ought, since these extend throughout life as a whole, having a weight on capacity that bears on virtue as well as, so there being virtue that has a weight and capacity that bears on the question of excellence, orete, virtue, but also on a happy life, right? For people choose pleasant things but avoid painful. So that's the thing. The people choose the pleasant things but avoid the painful. It would seem that what concerns such matters ought least of all to be passed by, especially since they admit of much dispute. So therefore, there's such a thing because of this virtue is so important. Now this question is so important, and that virtue people will seek pleasure and avoid pain. Right? This is so important. This seems to be this concerns such matters one ought least of all to passively ignore it, not to address it. We need to address it. In other words, we're saying we need to address it, and especially since this amidst much dispute. For some say that pleasure is the good. Others say pleasure is, to the contrary, altogether base thing. And some of these latter, perhaps because they have been persuaded that pleasure is such in fact, others because they suppose it to be better with a view to our life to declare that pleasure is among the base things, even if it is not. So there are 4 possibilities. One, that is, some say it is the good. It is the good. Others say it's contrary. It's altogether base things. And others say some of these latter people, perhaps some of these ladders, perhaps because they've been persuaded that pleasure is such, in fact, that is bad. They do that. They're persuaded. They claim this because they've been persuaded that it is bad. Persuaded that pleasure is such, in fact, that it's others because they suppose it to be better with a view to our life to declare. In other words, those who've been persuaded, they think it's really good. So of these two types, of the last two, thinks it's bad. One is because they've been persuaded, and the other one think, well, maybe it's better that they think it's bad. In other words, that it is more useful that it's bad. In other words, some of these latter perhaps because they have been persuaded that it is, others because they suppose that it is better to be with a view to our life. In other words, a view to our life, to declare that pleasure is among the base. In other words, it's useful to say that base things, even if it's not. In other words, it's just better that if people think this, even if plus it isn't that completely that. So one is persuaded that it's bad, but the other one says, well, it's just better that we think that it's bad. So there's two positions. Of the two positions, the second position, there's two possibilities. One is that they're persuaded that it's really bad, and the other one is saying, well, it's just more useful to have people believe that it's bad. Okay, it's better for us. For many, they suppose, because this last group, for the many, they suppose, the hoi polloi, they suppose, tend towards it, because the many like it. The many like it. And in fact, are enslaved to pleasures. They're enslaved to their pleasures, because many's like it, and they're enslaved to the pleasures. And this is not good. Hence, one ought to lead them towards the contrary, opposite of their pleasures. In other words, the contrary. In other words, and since in this way they might arrive at a middle. In other words, they'll arrive at a middle. But remember that virtue is a middle condition between extreme and excess. Therefore, pleasure is kind of like, okay, they'll lead to a pleasure, they go to excess, they go to their things. No, we need to say it's the opposite to try to drive them to the middle, right? But this may not be nobly stated, beautifully stated, nobly stated. In other words, this kind of argument is not nobly stated. For arguments concerning matters of passion and action carries less conviction than do the relevant deeds. So that, in other words, the arguments concerning these things, matters of passions and actions, are less conviction. In other words, they're not really believing. They're just saying this as than do the relevant deeds. Whenever, then, such arguments are discordant with what is perceived, they are treated with contempt and undermine the truth. So, therefore, in other words, okay, here's a danger. The danger with such arguments, that this kind of argument, is that when you see that that is not the case, and that in other words, that you see that they're discordant with what is perceived, they're then treated with contempt and undermine the truth, the real truth. So the argument you decide, the second argument is dangerous because you know it's not true, but you're saying it anyways, and because of that, when they perceive that the truth is that that's not the truth, I lose faith in the argument. It's good. The truth is held with contempt and undermines the truth. Right. The argument is perceived with contempt. Should someone who blames pleasure ever be seen at aiming at it, he is held to be inclined towards it, because he holds every pleasure to be good. In other words, the problem is once you do this, then you must believe that you're doing it. That means you must think pleasure is to be good. If you argued that it's against it, but I see you aiming at the pleasant, then you must really be a liar, and you really must think it is the good, the simply good. Some who blame pleasure, even should someone who blames pleasure ever be seen aiming at it, he is held to be inclined towards it because he holds every pleasure to be good. So that's not the case. The problem is that not every pleasure is going to be good. For the drawing of precise distinctions does not belong to the many. That's what the problem is. Precision is not something the many have. The many, therefore, you drink it this way, you risk the thing. So let's be precise. In other words, if it is the true arguments then that seem most useful, the true is seems more useful, not only with the view to knowledge, but also with life, view to life. In other words, Yes, although the drawing of precise is not something that belongs to the many, but it is the true arguments that are not only that it seems most useful, but also with a view to knowledge, but also with a view to knowledge, but not only with a view to knowledge, but also with a view to life. They're useful not only for knowledge, but they're also viewed to life. Being truthful about what is this allows us to act properly, know what is really, to understand that pleasure is not always bad. Is that some types of pleasure taken to an extreme, or pleasure, the wrong kinds of pleasure, being pleased by low things, right? Uh, Loving the noble versus loving the base, right? That is a different type of pleasure involved, right? For since true arguments are in harmony with deeds, they carry conviction. Hence, they prompt those who understand them to live in accord with them. So, therefore, this is interesting. True arguments are in harmony with deeds, are in harmony with deeds. And because they're in harmony with deeds, they carry conviction. Hence, they prompt those who understand them to live according with them. But enough about such things. Let us proceed to what has been said about pleasure. So we stop in here. That's enough about this point, about whether this is that. Let's talk about pleasure. So we stop here. We end the chapter 1 on this brief introduction of framing the argument, rejecting and basically saying we have to care about the truth of the matter, not appearing to what appears to be maybe what is simply we may distort this, and we don't really believe it, but we advance what we think is useful. But the problem with that is once you do that, once you're caught out, people lose faith. You lose faith. It's truthfulness, precision, and truthfulness is not only useful to knowing, but also useful to what? It's useful in order to the question of how you live your life, how one is going to live. And thus, again, he rounds up that true arguments are a harmony with deeds, they carry conviction, and therefore they prompt others to live by them, accord with them. A conviction of it leads others to follow them, right? And this ends this introduction. So let's stop here. Put your comments and questions below, and I'll say them and I'll respond to them if I see when I see them. This is a brief chapter introduction of this this last book. We turn next to chapter 2. So please put your comments and questions. Please hit the like button if you liked it. If you liked it, please share it on social media. Share it far and wide. Help get the algorithm growing by liking it and sharing it. If you've not subscribed yet, please consider subscribing. Subscribe. Encourage people to come to the channel, check it out. Check not only what we're doing, wrapping up the ethics, but also check the other stuff we've done and the other playlists. Because we've been around for a couple of years now, and we have almost 500 videos. Okay? Go check them out on different playlists and things we've discussed. Another thing you do is you can follow me on social media. The links are below. If you want to know more about me as an academic and see my research and check out my scholarship and that stuff, you can check the academic social media below the social media. And if you want to help me to do what I do, you can contribute via Patreon or Subscribe Star, or by buying one of my books, either directly through your local bookstore, if they ask them to order it, or on buying it through an online distributor like Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or Libris, or A&E, whatever kind there is available you use. Or you can order it directly through the publisher. Okay, those are the 3 things. So therefore, take it. We'll see chapter 2 next. Take care. Bye-bye.